All right. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. And joining me today is Marti Konstant. She runs a company called Constant Change, and she specializes in career agility and futurism. Thank you so much for joining me, Marti.
I'm so delighted to be here. When I got up this morning, I said, oh, I get to talk to Nola Simon today. So I'm the lucky one.
We've been chatting for about 3 years online, and Marti is one of the most generous people that I've come across. She's constantly putting thoughtful comments and connecting me and introducing me. She's brought me into groups that she participates in. She just has a way, she's a super connector, right? And she's definitely a great person to know. So I really appreciate her. Can you tell me the story about the career agility? At one point, you told me that you came up with this idea and you've actually been working on it for 10 years.
Yes, agility is everywhere right now, but 12 years ago, we didn't have agile transformation within organizations. A lot of that's happened within the last 8 to 9 years. But it was really 12 years ago. I was in tech. I was in tech marketing. I was a chief marketer, VP of marketing for growth stage tech companies, traveling around the world, launching products, and come to realize that the engineers in our organizations did things really smartly in their agile software development methodologies. And I saw how they collaborated. I saw how they launched products in an iterative fashion. And I thought, this is way different than marketing. Marketing 10, 20 years ago is like the 2-year plan, the 5-year plan, the 1-year plan, as opposed to the rolling plan. And I just figured I need to research more of this. And in 2012, just 11 years ago, I got on a plane, went to San Francisco. I live in Chicago in the center of the country of the US, and got on a plane to learn with other global marketers to learn how we can apply agile thinking to the area of marketing. It shouldn't just be owned by engineers. So we created our manifesto in 2012. Agile HR happened, I think, in 2017. It's been rolling out. And so Agile now is everywhere. And so I did everything I could. I looked in 2012, I checked online to see if there was anything under career agility. 0 results. So that was really the beginning or the launch pad of my research and my book on career agility. So that's what you asked, like, how did it all start? That's how it started. And on the way back on the plane, I said, oh, not only does this relate to agility, this relates to companies, and this relates to people. Agile mindset, agile careers.
It's always so interesting when you actually cross-pollinate the thinking. So you see this a lot. The coach that I work with is Carrie Twigg, and she has a background in drama and meditation, right? And she brings that into careers and organizations, right? So it's always interesting when you actually can cross-pollinate. So for you, you didn't necessarily go the drama route, you went the technology route. And how can you cross-pollinate that with career advice? So I think that's incredibly smart.
It's all about patterns. It's pattern recognition.
Yeah.
What are the patterns in maybe disparate industries and people and companies, and figure out, how can I apply this and how can I combine these, a mashup, if you will, of 2 maybe seemingly disparate types of thought and create something wholly new.
Yeah, and that's where the best innovations come from, right? Because you're taking aspects of things that are known, but the combination is what's new and refreshing, right?
It's a combination. It's when you take 2 different things, you can create something new. You can do it 2 ways. You can just become an expert at one thing your entire career, and you can just build, and you can go deeper and deeper. Or you can start to combine, let's call it a recombinator, a mindset where you bring it all together. Everybody does a little bit of both, but I think we could all agree that there's a lot of experts that are very skilled and deep into their area of expertise. They win Nobel Prizes on these on these areas of expertise.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I've always been more a combiner as well too. Like when I went to university, I majored in math, I minored in history. I took it all in French with a spattering of like sociology and Spanish on the
Mhm.
side. So it's like for me, it's like, how does it all stir into a pot? And what can I get out of that?
Yeah, then you must be a firm believer or an adopter of the work, it's probably almost 20 years old, The Medici Effect by Franz Johansson. And so he wrote a book about this. He went to Harvard and he worked on this in his area of research, went out to start a company, came back, finished his MBA, and wrote this body of work on the Medici effect, which is a Medici effect, depending on how you pronounce it, from the Renaissance. And it's not a mistake or a coincidence that so much came out of the Renaissance when you brought that many creative people together in community that had different disciplines of art and science. And so the creation output during that time period was just phenomenal. Franz Johansson wrote this incredible book that's used all over the world now in innovation labs.
I missed that particular book, but I agree with the concept. So yes, I would fully support that. And I see this all over the place. It's like we're gradually moving away from the specialist and it's moving more into the area of the generalist. And it's hi, yay. It's about time. But that's
I call it broad interest patterns.
yeah,
When you have broad interest patterns, it's okay to get curious.
yeah, exactly. And you were commenting this morning on somebody's post about the T-shape interest. So like you want to go deep in certain aspects, but then be broad across the top.
And so that was by Dr. Nadia Zechembayeva. She is, I guess, a futurist in the idea of reinvention. And she talked about how to stay current in your life and your career and in your company, because companies aren't living as long as they used to. So if you're not always on the state of reinvention, that's one thought. But the other thought was it's okay to widen that T and not feel like you always have to go T. We've got the T-shape model for how one learns and how one grows a business.
Very cool. So in terms of futurism, how do you incorporate that into your work?
I talk about being a workplace futurist and helping people, individuals, and organizations bring their future to the present so that they can innovate, so that they can explore, and by above everything, so that they do not stagnate. Stagnation is the enemy of growth. So that's how I bring the future mindset into the agility mindset. So if we compare that to agility, agility is, I have a definition that I created that it's actually the #1 definition on Google right now for what is an agile career. And it is a self-reflective, incremental career path guided by response to change, evolving job roles, and designed to optimize creativity, growth, and happiness. And so this is how I mash those two areas together, because a career and a company needs to be adapting and evolving and reinventing to stay alive and to thrive in tomorrow's economy and in today's economy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I love the idea of bringing the future to the present because you need to know what steps to take that are going to guide you to that future outcome. When the future is unknown, how do you make it a reality?
And a lot of futurists, I know that you hang out with a lot of foresight researchers and people that think about the scenario planning for the future. And there's typically 3 ways of thinking about the future, and they all have different names, but one of them is more pessimistic, dystopian. It's what's going to happen if we don't intervene now and make a decision to change. Another one's like you're doing some of the things. And then the third one, which is the area that I like to hang out in, is it's the optimistic view of the future is what can we do, whether it be something like climate change or hybrid work environments. What can we do right now to make it better for the future? I wrote a white paper a few years ago called Happy Profitable Employees. And so I didn't see workforce agility or individual agility as being one or the other. People need to make money to live, and they need to be rewarded based on their abilities and their contribution. And it shouldn't be at the cost of their own happiness. And the organizations need to optimize as well. So it's two sides of that, that it's not just that the organization is profitable, that we optimize profits, but it's also that the individual optimizes their creativity, growth, and happiness, and their monetary compensation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be a trade-off, right? And honestly, I interviewed somebody who wrote a book called Intrinsic, and Dan Pink has written about this as well in Drive, where it's if you can supercharge the motivation, which so you've got purpose, autonomy, what's the third one? Mastery. That's going to fundamentally fuel the work and build happiness, and that feeds into wellness, and that supercharges the organization. I actually interviewed somebody last week, another futurist, and he said that he quoted all kinds of statistics that companies that actually embrace the futurist mindset, futurist thinking, they're so many percentages above their competitors in terms of like productivity, competitiveness, and growth. So it's something that actually can supercharge business. My interest is in why futurists always are drawn to speaking. So can you explain to me how you got involved in speaking? Is that something you've always done?
I've wanted to speak since I was young, really in grade school, but I was terrified of it. And when I was in grade school, I thought I'm going to approach my fear with curiosity. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to forget what I'm supposed to say, and I'm just going to do it. And I feel like I just fumbled along in high school and even college. But when it came for volunteering to summarize what the group worked on, I raised my hand. And I would say that my presentation skills were adequate at best, but they did eventually get better. And so back to your question, why do futurists like to talk? I think people that have an expertise in anything and a curiosity about anything enjoy learning and extending their knowledge. And it is a two-way street, because anytime you speak, you're learning, because the real learning happens in the we've had a great opportunity over the past 2 years to speak in virtual environments. So I really work with the chat environment, and I'll stop my speech. I'll say, let's take a minute here. It's not about finishing what I have to tell you. It's about how your thinking creates a better conversation. So I often go into the conversation, into the group. Haven't cracked that code yet in a ballroom where you can really get into these chats. So I think that the virtual environment has just been an enormous opportunity for speakers to engage with people with polls. People don't like polls so much anymore. They like the questions. They like being heard, and they want, when their curiosity gets to them, they don't necessarily want to hear what you have to say in the rest of your speech. They want to hear the discussion that relates to them. So I try to do a little bit of that. So I'm working on that in a public venue.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I've actually heard speakers say that being back on stage, it's almost like the audience has become this black box, and they miss the chat function because they can't tell whether the points are really landing the way they intend, the way that they could in virtual. So it's almost like they've lost something by converting back into futures. So that's where the opportunity is. How do you bring what was successful during the pandemic into something that everybody envisioned going back to the way it was, and make it better?
And this is what agility agility, the sidekick that I talk about is adaptability. So if you put those two together, if you are adapting to the circumstances, finding out what works, understanding the patterns of what works, and then creating a new mashup, a new experience, that's what the future of speaking is. I was told 10 years ago that speaking had changed dramatically, and that because I wasn't really being paid for speaking 10 years ago. And so I learned that the old model, I grew up listening to people like Zig Ziglar, not necessarily online, in recordings, and they were more entertainment and motivation.
I'm drawn to
Yeah,
story.
I went to a speakers conference, National Speakers Association conference a few weeks ago, and the very first presentation, one of the very first quotes was, "It's about storytelling, not influence." We
Yes.
all hear about influence. We all know the books that are written about influence and persuasion, Robert Cialdini, all this persuasion. Yet the storytelling is what we remember.
Yeah, the storytelling is. It's interesting you mentioned influence. Are you familiar with Zoe Chance?
I
So
am not for Zoe Chance. I know you covered Zoe on a recent podcast.
yeah, exactly. That's right. She actually teaches at Harvard. One of the most popular courses that she teaches and is actually at Harvard. And she actually tells a story in her book. It was actually about she and a friend made a really bad judgment and got in a car with strangers. And her friend, they got locked in the back, and her friend screamed, and her inclination was to be silent. And because her friend completely went off the deep end and was kicking and screaming, they let them out. They survived. And that's the most scary story that she tells in that book. And I can still feel it.
Yes. Wow.
And
That's a remarkable story.
it is a remarkable story, but it's just, you have to trust your instinct. And the most powerful thing that you have is your voice. And that's the lesson that sticks with me from that book. So I think that supercharge, like combining, going back to that combination, if we can combine what we know about what influence is with storytelling, that's where it gets really exciting.
Yes. I'm a long-term marketer. I was a marketer for tech companies for years, and the power of influence is a necessary component of success. If you don't influence how people think, how they relate to your product, your service, your industry, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. So we are talking about questions. Let's shift a little bit and talk about the value of questioning and prompt engineering in AI, because you've
Right.
got
And
that interest in questions, right?
yes, questions. I used to be stymied by this. When I was in high school and college, I would be the person that's sitting in the room and learning everything I could, doing all the homework, and of course, volunteering to present. But the one thing that I think that I was weak on was raising my hand to ask solid questions, because I was afraid that my questions weren't the right types of questions. I questioned my own ability and my own curiosity. And I learned that whether it's a Socratic method of learning in business school, that those that ask the questions are those that are noticed in the classroom, and they're also noticed in business. And I also learn from those people asking questions. So often now, the best way for me to engage at a conference is when they say, "Does anybody have any questions? Do you want to get up to the microphone?" I'm often a person that runs up to the microphone. I'm usually like the first or the second one, because I'm taking that risk to ask my question. Learns, not just me, but everyone in the room learns when you ask a question. And we shouldn't second guess our questions. If we're curious about it, someone else is curious about it. So that's the background on questions, and it brings us to things like prompt engineering and AI. And I've got the paid version of ChatGPT. It dropped last week, ChatGPT 4. And
Already have access?
yes, because
Oh,
if you're a
cool.
paid member, if you're a
Yep.
paid subscriber, I got it the day it happened, and there was a distinct difference in the quality and citing research or citing other things. It still has its weaknesses, but I am convinced that the hundreds of questions that I see online right now of how you can use ChatGPT to write an article or to come up with 3 ideas that will summarize your article. So you might spend an hour on the article, but you need something that brings ideas from elsewhere back into your writing, and you maybe need a bullet point or 2. I think that's a brilliant use. And I also think it's outlining a book or a concept that you have is a good idea. I think gathering research, gathering thoughts, just doing all kinds of projects that you can do. I'm not into this thing of, oh, let's write a sonnet. That's goofy and silly and interesting, but it's not like a kind of thing that I want to read that's published by others. But I do want to explore productivity. There's a study that came out by a tech scout. I know a bunch of tech scouts, and in the programming world of writing code, they have data that suggests that there's a 55% increase in productivity over a period of time in the work that is being done by programmers. Now, there's a lot of things that are being talked about in the legal world. I talked to a lawyer the other day. He goes, it's not yet at the quality of the brief. He goes, but I do use it for research. He goes, I do use ChatGPT. So it's these things. I think the bottom line is, if you can pose the right question in the words that make sense to artificial intelligence, you're going to get brilliant thought back.
Yeah.
So that I'm willing to go on record as saying that it's garbage in, garbage out, and there's a lot of garbage going in ChatGPT right now. But I see a lot of brilliance going in, and the results that are coming out, like people will write like little scripts and programs.
Really?
It's great. Or they'll write, we always call a first draft of anything the big ugly first draft when we're writing a book or an article. You can get an ugly first draft, and then you can add all of the elements that come from your research and bring it into it, but it takes away that blank page. So I think the questions are just brilliant. And so my mission for myself is to become better at questions. So I spend a few hours every week. I go to a lab on Monday nights. The lab that I go to for 2 hours every Monday night is between Mid-Journey generative AI and ChatGPT. And I hear from the tech scouts of what's going. This is where we get the stats of where things are headed or where they might be headed, a possible future. And I'm taking note and I'm experimenting. So the power of the experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. The use that I see is like, how can we augment what humans already do? And how can we use it as a tool to supercharge our work? So I can see the use case where you've written something and then you want to know what are the similar topics that could actually add depth to what you've already written. So what are like the adjacent skills, going back to career agility. I did a podcast early with a company that they use AI in recruiting, right? So they use AI to identify adjacent skills that they don't even know their employees have, to get them actually into different future focused roles, right? So you can use that with writing, you can use that with people and skilling and reskilling, but it's also, I'm sure, in a lot of different ways as well too, right? So that's where the opportunity for me is. I can see how do you use it in a way that identifies your blind spots? Like, where are the connections that you're just not seeing right off the bat?
Yeah, I saw an educator, Ethan Mollick, writes it's called One Useful Thing. And it's like the next thing that I'm reading. And he writes about using it in the classroom. So there's this big fear that people will cheat and it's going to be the death of education. And it's his premise, it's not going to be the death of education. You use it in your learning methodology. So one of the things that he'll use it for is to do in-class quizzes, tests, real time. So instead of just teaching all quarter and having a quiz, they do test quizzes. And I remember this because I did testing before I went into business school. I did classes back when we just did training, an instructor-led class on how to answer questions better on these tests. And then you took a bunch of tests, questions. So 3, 4, 5 of them, whatever it would take, so that the day of the test, you'd be really good. So he has a number of examples, dozens of examples of how he uses it in the classroom for optimal effect. The kids are going to use it anyway.
Yeah.
Kids, grown-ups, everyone's going to use it anyway. Why not shape it in such a way that you'll have better learning experiences? I'm a random access learner. That's why hyperlinks and hypertext all those years ago were so important. Just learning everything all incrementally and methodically was a little hard on me. But when I had the opportunity to go deep in one area and move here and there and then bring it all back together. And I think that's what's happening right now with tools like this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you can't shut it down. You can't stop it. So how do you work with it? And you have to be aware that there's maybe questions about the reliability, the accuracy, even bias that might be built in. Acknowledging all of that doesn't mean that it can't eventually become something that's going to be incredibly useful. So that's where I think the optimism comes from is, yes, there's this dark interpretation of this is going to take everybody's job, but what if it doesn't? What if it changes the job? And what if it changes those jobs to be better? That's
right. And I mean,
exciting.
How different is this than any new way? The wave is happening. They sometimes call it the AI tsunami. The wave has already happened, and it's happened in the remote and hybrid workplace. It's comical to me that organizations are saying, are we going to do hybrid? Are we going to do remote? This has already happening. The people have spoken. The wave of influence is coming from the people who are doing the work, who are doing the heavy lifting, who are building the organizations. And it's up to both sides. Again, I call it the happy, profitable employees for a reason. It's both sides of the equation must work together to figure this out together. It is not this will work and this is what we're putting on you. And I feel the same way about some of this new technology. And I don't think that the metaverse has vanished. I think the way that we've learned in virtual learning environments, the way that pilots started learning how to fly airplanes 30 years ago with simulations, this stuff is not going away.
Right. There's a use case for it somewhere, right? It may not be mainstream at this particular point, but it may change in the future, right? We don't quite know. Are you willing to discount it? And that's really where do you want to shut all the doors? That's what it comes down to, right? Because if you're saying that you don't want to investigate the metaverse, you don't want to investigate AI, you're essentially shutting a door. And
yeah, people always ask me, like, what could I do to make certain that I am vibrant in the future?
yes.
And I said, take a look at all the exponential technologies of things, blockchain, the metaverse, AI. Take a look at all of these exponential technologies and do something with them. If you don't pursue it, at least get curious about it, start reading about it, go to an online forum, try to understand its application. I call it the ultimate try-on of clothing. When you go and try on clothing, is this me? Does this scarf suit me? Is it my coloring? Try to wear it and say, no, that's not me, but I'm interested in that aspect of it, and then go on to the next thing and to continue the try-on process.
If AI can figure out how to fit pants virtually, then I think we've got a product that I can get behind.
Yeah, the virtual stuff this is just a side note, but when I did my first virtual speaking event, I didn't do it with the headset. I did it in the 2D on the computer. in one of these. It was spatial.io was one of them, but there's a number of them, Engage and others. And I didn't know what to wear. And I didn't know if I should look like I do right now. Should I choose my hair color with a blonder color? Should I be a really tough, super image, just a tough with tall boots and things like that? So I must spend an hour and a half trying to figure out how to dress for this virtual presentation. And it's funny because the size of the image on the stage is just about a half of an inch, and the most of it was the slide, and there were no movements. Now you can do, if you get the right sensors, Internet of Things, right? If you get the right sensors on yourself, you'll be able to use your hands, and it'll be a more, I think, engaging experience. But just the clothing was a big deal. And no one really wrote about that or talked about it, but I pondered over it for at least an hour before I did my first one and decided, oh, I think I'm going to wear glasses for this one. I think I'm going to pull my hair back.
Yeah, no, and that's cool. But that's really, it's like, how did that relates all to personal branding, right? So everybody understands what they're doing with personal branding as it stands right now on LinkedIn, but it's how you integrate your clothing. And then to accelerate that and then put that on an avatar, when you have complete choice, do you have to actually really represent yourself as you exist physically right now? What are you choosing? And what does that say about who you are? And how do you do that in a way that's authentic? Like for me, avatars almost never have the shade of white of hair that I have. And I can't choose different color eyes because
But they do.
Do they?
They totally have white hair. I went in as white hair, really beautiful white hair and kind of long styles pulled off to the side, almost like big pigtails. Yeah, absolutely. You would be right at home with your hair. Okay. You'd find lots of examples. And it's not gray, it's white.
Okay, interesting. I haven't personally come across it. And then the other thing is, and again, it comes back to like that feeling of belonging. One eye is blue, one eye is green. Everything is built for eyes being the same color. And I get it because that is the standard. I am an extreme example. But it's every time I get into something like that, this was not built for me.
Yeah, blue and green are close. And I would say the world is built for all of us.
Right.
I get what you're saying. I don't think that I'm 5'2", 5'2" in the system that we use in the US for measurement, but I'm 5'2", and a lot of things are out of my reach. So I can say, is that world not built for me? But I've got a step stool in my kitchen. And I never even thought of myself as short in stature because of how I felt about myself inside. And I was always shocked when people would say, oh my gosh, you're a lot shorter than I thought you would be. So is the world built for me? Maybe yes, maybe no, but I choose to think that it's built for me.
I'm 5'1 3/4.
I think I'm about that as well. So we've got something in common.
And it's funny because people often say, if I meet them in real life, they're like, you're taller online. And I'm like, why is that? What is it about personality that makes people think that you're taller?
Yeah, it is. It is. And my husband's 6'3", so, I don't think of myself as being a foot shorter.
Oh, really? Oh, my husband's only 5'6", and I get told a lot that I'm short. So I guess maybe it's all attitude.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But no, that's something I follow people who I actually did a podcast on fashion and the future of work and hybrid and going back to the office and all that stuff. So I think it's interesting that you're bringing in fashion to a conversation about virtual presenting.
Yeah, I've done a handful of presentations, 3 different platforms, and I did spend time before each one of them, and I dressed totally differently because I had to have different avatars.
Yeah.
Totally different avatars. And I thought maybe I should go in as a different color skin. What should I do here? So I chose to replicate closer to what I was, but I might have dressed a little bit more expressively, but I chose to be as closer to my skin color, blue eyes, things like that.
And honestly, I think that's the good choice because like ethically, is that kind of controversial if you're actually choosing a different skin color?
I would think it would be.
I would think that it wouldn't be, right?
It wouldn't be authentic at all.
No, not at all. And then it's okay. you're presenting yourself in a way that's just not your lived experience. And are you taking away from somebody else with that lived experience? So
Unless it's an experiment.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a learning experiment. We've seen structured experiences
Right.
of what it's like to wear someone else's shoes, and that's a whole different discussion. And this isn't a discussion about how to be more open and how to be more inclusive, but I get it. Yes, I'm only myself in the virtual
Yes.
world.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's the best choice because quite honestly, you're quite fun. I approve that choice. We are coming up to time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure we were highlighting?
I would say that I guess my dream for the future, you asked a question earlier, like why would a futurist want to express or talk? And I would say, I want to be able to inspire and motivate others to think about this and to get excited about what's around the bend. And I think the mandate that I would say, or what I would recommend, is just to today take notice of all of the changes that are happening in your universe. Write them down, think about them. What's happening in your industry? What's happening in your company? What's happening in your neighborhood? How will this impact the decisions you make? And make a commitment to yourself to have a point of view about those changes. Don't just let those changes just pass you by. It is a risk to let them just pass you by. It's like that person in the back of the car. Let's think about what I'm going to do in that case to save myself. In this case, for the future, what am I going to do to bring my future to the present and to make it meaningful and to make certain that I am a part of it in an expressive and powerful way versus a passive way? So that's what I would like to leave your listeners with, and also to say that I am a huge believer in the way that you're producing your podcast and the guests that you've had on. And thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying it. That conversational style, I often get asked for like a list of questions, and I don't want to let that go because I enjoy the conversation and I just think it feels more engaging and more fun. So I'm hoping that's true. I did want to tell you a story. Jane McGonigal is the futurist that I follow, and she does have that optimistic background as well too. So she shares a story where she was hiking with her husband and they saw this sign saying it was a no drone zone. And she didn't understand the sign. So she got really curious and are there that many drones that you really actually have to have a no drone sign? And who enforces the no drone zone? And why is that? And what else? And so just that question flipped off this whole change to her in how she parented her kids. Her husband is a filmmaker. He started using drones in his movies. They got their kids drones and taught them how to become drone pilots. And that just came from one simple question from a sign that she didn't understand while she was out on a hike. And that's where that curiosity, that mindset, I think that's what we're looking for people to adapt. So yeah, that would be my goal.
Yeah, that's a great concrete example. It's just the word drone. And you can say that's positive, it's negative, but she's choosing to say, how does this impact the future? How will my children interact? Clearly, drones are a thing that exist here today. They're delivering packages and they're exploring and they're taking beautiful photography, and they have nefarious uses as well. Not necessarily. So why not know your enemies and know what you think is going to be positive in your future, and know what you can do to operate it or to manage it or to interact with it in a positive way. It's a positive future. I think it's an area I got from the Institute for the Future, is creating positive futures. So I've done those seminars as well, where you create a positive future and you create scenarios and prototypes for what that positive future looks like.
Yeah, exactly. You're creating the world that you want to exist in. Right? Perfect way to end this podcast. So thank you so much, Marti.
The book is Activate Your Agile Career, and it's very relevant in today's world of change.
Yeah, definitely. I think almost everybody I know is pivoting their career in some way or fashion. All right.